renting sucks, right? I think everyone can agree with that.
Liza came to Canada 9 years ago as an immigrant. Now, she's building Chexy after facing a problem that wouldn't go away.
What have been some of the most painful parts in this journey so far?
Liza gets real about leaving a secure corporate life and jumping into the startup grind.
That might work for someone. I know I would be miserable.
Get tips on fundraising, co-founder dynamics, remote work, and more.
It's very much an numbers game. The same with dating, the same with a lot of things.
Liza, thank you so much for sitting with me today.
Thank you for having me.
I've only actually known you for a few months, but every single time we've connected, you've been such a thought leader in all things macroeconomic trends, housing market, rental markets, and building a really successful fintech startup. I think most people would know you as the CEO and co-founder of the rental platform Chexy. But what they might not know is that you're actually an immigrant to Canada. So I'd actually want to start there. I'd love to learn a little bit more about your journey here and how that's evolved into starting Chexy.
I've come to Canada about 9 years ago now as an international student. Went to UBC to do economics. I'm originally Eastern European born and raised. I'm from Belarus. To be honest, when I came to Canada, and I would say for the first 7 to 8 years of me being here, I never really thought about starting a business or becoming an entrepreneur. I think it was primarily driven by the fact that I come from a background of family business, and building a business in Eastern Europe is not easy. We've had our own share of macroeconomic challenges, especially in Belarus, hyperinflation, and so on and so forth. So I've definitely seen my family's business go through huge ups and downs, and the stress and the toll it takes on you as a family, and on my dad as a founder. As a result, when I came here and I saw all this opportunity to make a lot of money by just climbing the corporate ladder, I was like, well, why would I ever start a business? I can do really well, and by never really taking on any of the conventional risks, because even if the company that I'm working for is going out of business, I'll always be fine, I'll find another job, right? And it really wasn't until my last job before starting Chexy, I was leading finance and strategy for Square in Canada. It really wasn't until I came, across a problem that I've been kind of persistently facing as a renter for the last 10 years here. My brain really kind of went on this never-ending spiral of well, why is it like this? Why is it such an antiquated industry? Why is it that nobody has thought about changing it? Or maybe people have tried, but were not successful. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't really until I think I just couldn't let go of it that I kind of took the plunge. But I was definitely not one of those entrepreneurs who was consistently looking for an idea or for something to be set up with. I was quite happy in my corporate job, and I just kind of, came across a problem. I was so passionate about it. I wanted to try and solve it.
Let's talk about that. What exactly was the problem you were trying to solve?
In general, as a renter in Canada, renting sucks, right? I think everyone can agree with that. And it primarily is for 3 reasons. Number one, rent is incredibly expensive. It's 40% on average of your take-home pay, and it's climbing, 20% year over year over the last year. As a result of people paying so much in rent, home ownership is further and further out of reach. And it is very much a North American dream to eventually be a homeowner. Beyond that, as an immigrant and someone that didn't grow up with Canadian parents who taught me everything about the Canadian credit scoring system, being able to qualify.
Let's be real, even if you're in Canada.
Yeah, that's true.
A lot of people don't learn about that.
I do think it's very much an upper middle class to upper class kind of secret on how to handle debt. If you are raised in a family who's very financially secure and stable, your parents probably know all the ins and outs of the credit scoring system, and they're going to teach you about it. Yeah. But for the vast majority of folks out there, they don't think about it until it's probably too late.
I think that speaks to a lot of people that might be listening to this. And so you were coming across this problem, you couldn't get this idea out of your head. Walk me through the early days of you taking that idea and not letting it go to actually starting something that is real as a product.
It's a long journey, right? It doesn't happen overnight. And I started first thinking about the idea when I moved to Toronto from Vancouver when I took the job at Square. And that was in early to mid 2021. I started really kind of putting a lot of thought into it and starting to talk to other tenants. I remember reaching out to people on Reddit and asking people to jump on calls with me to share about their experience finding a rental, paying for rent, and just understanding the market more. That probably went on from mid 2021 to kind of the fall of 2021. During that time, I also started working with one of my co-founders who is, who was and is one of my closest friends who I went to school with. And we would kind of meet on weekends, talk about what this could potentially look like, and the idea has changed many different times, obviously.
What was the initial idea?
I will say the initial idea probably remains like the North Star we want to build towards, but as a first-time entrepreneur, you have this initial idea that's like just incredibly challenging to execute on, and then you kind of boil it down and narrow it down. So our original idea was, can we build something along the lines of like an Airbnb, but for longer-term rentals, where people can, in one place, across Canada, qualify for a rental. Like you have your rental profile has been underwritten, so the landlords can see exactly, how much you're making, what your credit score is, all the type of jazz. So you don't have to submit different applications across different portals. You can search for places, you can pay for your rent there, you can do property management and communicate with your landlord, because all of that is super disjointed right now. The whole process is like, there's a variety of different platforms you can find a place on. Every landlord has their own like application process. So like finding a place is a big pain point, and then you're still paying with positive checks and maybe e-transfer. So there's very little benefit to the tenant, and it's just a very painful process. What we found out later, obviously, as we did some research, is like, again, building a marketplace, incredibly challenging. We kind of focused on tenants because we thought it was overlooked. A lot of people have tried to build landlord tools that have not been successful in Canada. So we focused on the tenant side and thought, payments is sticky, it's recurring. It's also my subject matter of expertise because of my Square background. So it was kind of the one that we have gone through with.
Anyone who's building a tech product, they always talk about finding product market fit. Tell me more about the methodologies that you use to actually get to product market fit and when you knew that you had it.
I don't know if we have it. To be honest, product market fit is such a wide term that is interpreted in so many different ways. For us, like the idea of product market fit was, can we get people to essentially find us and sign up for our product without us having to spend a lot of money on acquiring customers. So the moment that you have people primarily finding you organically or through channels like Reddit or referrals to their friends, that's how personally we knew we were onto something. We do spend very little on cost of customer acquisition. And I think that's like for a B2C company is what you would define as like early signs of product market fit, because people clearly crave the solution enough that they're searching for it, and also they're coming across it in whatever media they're consuming, Reddit, etc., or they're being referred to by their friend and they're actually signing up. That's really how you can, I would say, define like early PMF signs. But again, I think it would be foolish to call and say we have found product market fit yet.
So I actually want to jump into your finance background. And so you mentioned you were talking to Square, but I noticed that you have a CFA designation. You've also worked in capital markets before that. So do you think that having that type of background was helpful in building this business?
In many ways, when it came to us fundraising and raising VC money, my experience helped massively in terms of being able to capture kind of the opportunity in a financial sense in a good and easy to follow financial model, and also being able to show, the growth and the space. I remember thinking when we were raising, I don't know how founders who don't come from a background like this do it, but obviously many of them do. At Square is when I really focused on payments. So at Square, I oversaw our business in Canada. And understanding all the ins and outs of payments and exactly all the cost drivers of payments is what essentially enabled Chexy to build a successful business model based on payments.
Did you feel adequately prepared to be a founder?
I don't think you can ever really be prepared to be a founder, because I do think it is glamorized, like the founder journey is glamorized, but the day-to-day is a grind, and it's very difficult. And it's difficult on many different aspects. Like it's difficult psychologically, it's difficult because you're working a lot, so it's difficult on your body. And this is not to complain here. I think it was the right decision for me personally to not like start a business right out of university. I do think my experience, maturity that comes with age, the network that, working in different companies allows you to have, I do think all of these things were really, really helpful. I definitely wouldn't have done it any other way, but I do think you can never really be ready because it's a completely beast of its own.
So talking about the less sexy parts of building a business, what have been some of the most, painful parts in this journey so far?
I just think, especially the industry that we are in, specifically dealing with people's money, right? And specifically dealing with probably the most important payment they make every single month, which is their rent, the biggest payment they make. you have very little room for something going wrong. Dealing with people's money is like, it's incredibly stressful.
Arguably, you did choose a very, very difficult industry. You're dealing with banks who are very, very slow. You're dealing with a regulated industry. And it's so important to your most critical stakeholders as well. You have a co-founder, and I see that you have 2 other co-founders, so there's 3 of you. It's actually quite rare. I feel like a lot of startups, they might have 2, but not 3.
There's benefits to having 3, and there's also difficulties, I think, of having 3.
Let's hear about that.
So the good thing about 3 is there's always a bit of a breaking voice in the room, right? Like you think about if it was just, for example, me and Apteam, who we originally started with before Ben joined us a few months in, there's times where you just disagree, and there's times where you can be really mad at each other because of whatever, whatever happened. And if it's just the 2 of you, it would be very easy and unproductive to get into this like, no, you against me camp. And with 3, you always kind of have 2 of you really against 1, and it's kind of like then it's it's just a matter of voting, right? It's like the other one is like, well, the other 2, if both Apteam and Ben come to me and they say, hey Liza, I think you're wrong, it's going to be very hard for me to fight back and say, well, actually, I think you guys are wrong. And not to say that you can't, but it just makes decision making much easier. I would say the downside of 3 is depending on your skills and roles, some roles can, I guess, overlap, and especially in early startup days, that can create challenges on the team dynamic. So it's incredibly important to make sure that the roles are very, very clear. We are pretty lucky that all of us have a pretty different skill set, so I do think we managed to do this relatively well.
So what role do each of you play? So you bring finance, operations, payments, industry experience. What about the other 2?
So yeah, I'm the CEO because of my payments background, because I was the one that understands the business model best, and because of my VC network and finance network and ability to fundraise. And that's probably one of the most important skills a startup CEO can have if you are going on a venture track, is being able to sell the vision and raise money. So Apteam comes from more of a data strategy and product strategy background. So he actually leads more of a day-to-day product stuff. And then Ben is a CTO. So he comes from an engineering background. He's actually the one who's leading the engineering team and coding and building all of that. And he was the one who, with another engineer, essentially build our solution from the ground up.
Well, it sounds like the 3 of you have a very mature relationship working with each other. Do you have any tips for people who might be going the co-founder route on how to build trust and to align in values and vision when building?
There's essentially a couple of reasons for startup failure. One of the most common ones is founder disagreement, because it is tough. You essentially married to those people. You have to make decisions together. There's going to be good times and bad times. There's going to be personal stuff that each of you might be going through. My biggest piece of advice, I probably wouldn't go into business with close friends again. And the reason for that is we get along well and we disagree sometimes, and that's always been the case. So we actually have a very good social capital for being able to, I guess, debate and disagree, which is awesome. But I do think your relationship changes to being co-founders first and friends second. And so it really kind of is up to you. Are you okay with that? But at the same time, you want to go into business with someone you know well enough and you can trust well enough to making sure that you're aligned on what does success look like to you and when do you want to reach the success. That's also very important. So it would be very difficult if you have one founder who's we already reached what I define success. I just want to exit and now take it easy. But the other founder is no, I still see so much opportunity. So making sure you guys are aligned on what does success look like to you.
At what point did the 3 of you have that conversation and align those expectations?
Apteam and I got started before we met Ben. I think we're always aligned on it from kind of the very early days on exactly what we want and what success is defined to us and how we believe we're able to go about it, what our roles are going to be. Ben came in a few months after we started Chexy at Antler. I actually met Ben through Y Combinator co-founder matching, which is a great tool for meeting co-founders. I would massively recommend. We didn't bring him in as a third co-founder right away. We didn't give him equity right away. We really wanted to make sure it was the right fit. And so as we started working together, we had a lot of these conversations about what does the future look like? What happens if at some point we can't pay payroll? Are we all on the same page about what needs to be done, what we're willing to sacrifice? And so I do think, especially if you're bringing in a co-founder that, you don't know super well closely, it's incredibly important you spend a lot of that time dating and, put in place certain, metrics that you kind of would answer to yourself to say, hey, is this going to be a successful relationship or not? Definitely have as many of those conversations as possible, as early as possible.
Can you imagine this journey as a solo founder?
No. That's probably been like one of the biggest learnings for me personally, because as much as we disagree and as much as sometimes it can be difficult, I couldn't imagine doing this without the guys. Like, I have utmost respect for solo founders, but I just think about how much stuff you have to do as a solo founder, and that nobody, no matter how much equity you give your early employees, nobody's going to care about the business as much as you do and your co-founders do, if you have any. And in the end of the day, like in the times, like what I'm saying, where there is like DEFCON 1 or something is going wrong, it's like, these are the guys that are going to be with you side by side. These are the guys that are going to laugh with you, they're going to cry with you. And even just from a standpoint of like managing your time, when we were fundraising, it took us 3 months to close the round. For those 3 months, I was able to primarily spend 80 to 90% of my time on raising money. If I was a solo founder, that would be a complete standstill on the product. Like, you couldn't do that. You couldn't like focus on one thing exclusively. But I do think that's what enabled us to raise money in the difficult environment, is because we were able to do it in a short period of time. And I was like able to be laser focused on that, while Ben and Nav team continued to build the product. So once we closed the money, we were able to launch right away. Yeah. So it's like, it's the time, it's the support, it's different ideas, and someone like having the same kind of seat at the table with you and be able to disagree with you, because a lot of your early employees might not, right? Like, they might be too scared.
Yeah. So on the fundraising, you just mentioned it took you 3 months to raise your initial round of capital. First of all, congrats on raising money in this difficult macro environment. What was that process like for you? Because that seems relatively quick.
It is pretty quick. I would say, yeah. So it took us about 3 months. Like, I think we kicked off the round maybe just under 4 months. I will say it's a combination of a couple of things: creating competitive pressure and being very disciplined with approaching a lot of people at the same time. It's very much an numbers game. The same with dating, the same with a lot of things. It's very much the more people you're going to talk to, the more likelihood you're going to be able to get term sheets on. And the other thing is, the more people you talk to around the same time and the more competitive pressure you create, I mean, we learned that in investment banking, right? The better the results usually are. Because nobody wants to have a cold deal. Nobody wants to invest in a startup that's been trying to raise money for the 9 months, right? Yeah. It's becoming harder and harder. Generally, you want to be like the hot deal on the desk that people are committing, that every single week you have an update. Oh, now I'm 60% committed. Now I'm 70% committed. Now I have a lead. That's the kind of deal that you want to be. Which brings me actually to, I guess, another point. I do think a lot of people view raising money as a cornerstone of like building a successful business, which I completely disagree with. I think at the stage, especially that we raised our original round of capital, like that, like us being able to raise is maybe a good indication of just like a potential in the space, in the market, but also just me being a good salesperson. Yeah. Like, realistically, raising money is not building a successful business. And there's a ton of businesses that have raised millions of dollars and hundreds of millions of dollars that we've seen fail very shortly after. Especially in like that tech ecosystem, everyone is kind of like so focused on raising money, where I think you should be focused on, how am I going to get my initial customers? How am I going to get to revenue?
The perspective of what fundraising means to a company has shifted a lot. On one hand, it's validation from experts in this space. It's also de-risking yourself and providing you the runway to actually build the product that you want to build.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, it's an ego check mark for a lot of people. You're putting a line in the sand as to what your valuation is, and it means a lot to some people because then they can show off to their friends. But I think the founders who show they're committed to actually building their business and their product, that comes through, and that comes through over time. You can easily look at the track record of those startups in their future rounds, or how their company has performed over time since they fundraise, whether or not investors are just investing in smoke. We actually met at our mutual friend's place in Barbados earlier this year.
Yeah.
So I wanted to get your perspective on work-life balance, because you seem to actually travel quite a bit.
Yes, very much like a big believer and you can work from anywhere. Actually, we closed our fundraising round while I was in Colombia for a month. So I haven't met a lot of my investors in person and still end up having good relationships. So I'm very big of work remote fan. I do think work-life balance is tricky. Like it really depends on what you define as work-life balance. Like the fact that I can make a decision is like, am I a morning person? I'm gonna work really, really early morning and then sign up earlier, or am I like kind of like I sleep until like I'm not afraid to admit I sleep and get out of bed around like 8 a.m. every day. I'm not one of those founders who's like I'm up at 5 a.m. and then I'm working out. Like I'm not a morning person. Like for me, I get up, I start work, and then I usually work out and work late in the evenings. Like that's just generally who I am. Yeah. So there is no one definition to what like balance is for you. I do think one of the things that's been really helpful to me is having like a stable, I guess, at home situation and support is incredibly helpful. You know, I have a very supporting partner. If you have a very supporting family or a group of friends, like that really helps because your day-to-day is up and down. And so being able to like, I guess, when you are not working, feel kind of a sense of relief and sense of continuity really helps. You have to maintain a certain level of sanity because that's the only way you're going to be able to like not burn out.
And I think it's really important for people to hear that because if I log on to X or Twitter, I see a lot of, you know, if you're working more than 40 hours a week, then you're not doing the CEO job right. Or if you're not waking up at 5 a.m., things work differently for everyone.
Yeah.
And it's important to figure out what works best for you.
In the end of the day, like it all varies. Like I do think it would be very tough to be a founder in early stage and only work 40 hours a week just because you're always on. You have to be always on, depending on the kind of business that you are. But again, like that's just my perspective, right? I just generally think a lot of social media out there is very prescriptive on what a successful person should look like or what they should be doing. The whole like, yeah, I wake up at 5 a.m. and I go to the gym and I'm in the office by 7:30. It's like, that might work for someone. I know I would be miserable. I worked out once in the morning last week and I was so tired by 3 p.m. I was falling asleep.
And what advice would you have for people who want to incorporate more travel into their schedule?
Honestly, you just kind of do it. You make it work. I think that's the way I see it is like, yes, it's probably going to be less comfortable. And depending on what you're doing and what kind of home setup you have and, you know, work setup is like, I can really work from anywhere with just an internet connection and my laptop. So for me, it's kind of like I make travel plans, like we have travel plans and I'm sure I'll be working. Yeah. But in the end of the day, I can kind of make my own travel schedule and make my schedule work around that. I think it's also important to be very disciplined. Like when I do travel, when I'm working, like you saw me in Barbados, like there are going to be times where, you know, your friends are going to do something, but you have to say no. You're like, sorry, I actually have calls, I can't make it today. And so that can have a bit of a FOMO.
You're probably setting very firm expectations and communicating frequently with your stakeholders, with your team, your co-founders, with investors as well. So if you're managing all of those well, then you can make it work a lot easier.
100%. I do think I primarily like travel to destinations if I'm actually working actively that time in a similar time zone. I think that does make a big difference. Like I would love to go and travel in Asia, but I don't think that's going to work because, you know, there's a massive time difference. Beyond that, it really is like the internet connection and the laptop and being disciplined and having meetings set in a time that makes sense and having those constant touch points, like you said.
Oh, that's such an inspiration to hear. So I do want to end with some speed round questions if you're up for that.
Yeah, sure, let's do it.
What has been one book or resource that's been very influential on your journey?
Probably Shoe Dog by Phil Knight. Just
yeah, it's a good
really good book. First of all, amazing story. And I think a lot of people don't know the story and a lot of people assume overnight success for like big companies that have made it this far.
What is one non-negotiable in your day?
I think probably working out, although like it doesn't mean I work out every day, but I do try to stay active almost every day because I just think it massively helps.
If you could trade your day with one other entrepreneur, who would that be?
Probably Elon Musk. Honestly, I'm just fascinated by him. He's a very controversial persona. I don't agree with everything he says. He's in so many different industries and like how he handles being a CEO of all these different companies and in so many different spaces. Like how do you manage all of that? Because I'm barely managing one company would be like incredibly interesting.
It'd be fascinating.
Yeah.
And last but not least, in your opinion, what city is least favorable and what city is most favorable for renters in Canada?
I think least favorable right now is Vancouver and Toronto, probably tied for that. I actually have heard really good things about Montreal. Montreal has a very vibrant business community. It's a cool city. There's lots to do, but it's so much cheaper. There's a lot of rent control laws in Montreal. So I think just general tenant protection is a bit better.
Cool. Montreal, we're looking. Liza, thank you so much. This was really, really fun to have.
Oh, thanks so much for having me.